Good day and welcome back to your Bio 200 Laboratory, Chapter 9 Endocrine Series. Today, we will be discussing about the major endocrine organs that are found in your head or located in your brain. So first on the list is going to be a small pea-sized organ that is located in your brain, which is responsible for production of melatonin. Can somebody from the class identify which major organ produces melatonin? You are correct. That is your pineal gland. So your pineal gland produces melatonin. Your melatonin's major action is involved in your biological rhythms, or your sleep and wake cycle, or your light and dark cycle, as well as affecting seasonal cycles. Here is an image of where your pineal gland is located. So the pineal gland is actually very small. It's right around this area. And this would be your pineal gland zoomed in. So if we were to dissect a human brain, that is where you would locate your pineal gland. Let's continue and let's identify the different parts of the brain that would be involved in our endocrine functions. Before we proceed, can somebody from the group identify the area that is here or here? You are correct. So that is the thalamus. Now, let us proceed to identify the two other, okay, locations or organs in the brain. So who can identify the two other areas of the brain as pointed in the image on your screen? So you are correct. The first one is your hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, coming from the prefix hypo, which means below. Please remember that, class. The prefix hypo means below or under. So it simply states literally below the thalamus or hypothalamus. And of course, in contrast to your hypothalamus, your prefix epi means above, above the thalamus, which means that the organs pointed on your screen is going to be above the thalamus, thus they will be called epithalamus. However, for the discussion of endocrine system, we will be focusing more on the hypothalamus. Let's proceed. Hanging from your hypothalamus is your pituitary gland. So your pituitary gland is classified into two. So we have your anterior and posterior pituitary gland. Can somebody in the class identify which one among this image is going to be your anterior pituitary gland or your posterior pituitary gland? So which among of the two in the image on your screen is going to be your anterior and your posterior pituitary gland? Correct. So based on this image, so the one on the left presented in the image on your screen is going to be your anterior pituitary gland. And the one on the right is going to be your posterior pituitary gland. Let's proceed to the hormones that is secreted by your anterior pituitary gland. Can somebody from the class identify which hormone, okay, that is released by your anterior pituitary gland is responsible for the development of your bones and muscles? Anybody from the class? Very good. So that is your growth hormone produced in the anterior pituitary gland that is responsible for the development of growth of your bones and muscles. Let's proceed to the next one. What hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary gland is responsible for activation of your mammary glands? Somebody from the group? Correct. So the hormone that is secreted by your anterior pituitary gland that activates your mammary glands to stimulate milk production is going to be your prolactin. This time, let's proceed to the hormone that is secreted by your anterior pituitary gland that is responsible for the activation of your testes for the males and ovaries for the females. Anybody from the class that is able to identify the hormone produced by the anterior pituitary gland that activates your testes or your ovaries? That's correct. So it's actually two hormones that activate your testes or your ovaries. So we have your follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So your follicle stimulating hormone stimulates production of ova and sperm, okay, while the luteinizing hormone stimulates the ovaries and the testes. Let's proceed to the next one. So there is a hormone produced by your anterior pituitary gland that stimulates the activity of your thyroid and your parathyroid gland. So can somebody identify the name of the hormone produced in the anterior pituitary gland that stimulates the thyroid gland? Very straightforward, and you're correct. It is your TSH or your thyroid stimulating hormone. So those are the different hormones that is produced by your, okay, by your anterior pituitary gland. Now, how about for the hormone that is produced by your, or what about the hormone, okay, that activates the adrenal cortex? So this hormone is still produced in your anterior pituitary gland, and it is responsible for activating your adrenal cortex to secrete your glucocorticoids. Anybody from the group? So we're looking for the hormone responsible for activating your adrenal cortex. That's correct. So still produced from the anterior lobe of your pituitary gland is going to be your adenocorticotropic hormone, otherwise known as ACTH. And that summarizes the different hormones produced by your anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so if everyone is done taking photos of the different hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland, let's proceed to the posterior pituitary gland. Let's proceed to the hormones released, okay, by your posterior lobe. First in line is going to be your hormones that is responsible, okay, to stimulate contraction of the uterus and the milk letdown reflex. So what hormone is responsible for stimulation of the contraction of the uterus and the milk letdown reflex? Okay, so you are correct. That will be your oxytocin. Once again, that's your oxytocin, responsible for contraction of the uterus and the milk letdown reflex. Let's move forward to the next hormone that is produced by your or released by your posterior pituitary gland that affects the kidneys at this time. Anybody from the class that is able to identify the hormone released by the posterior lobe that is responsible for retention of water by the kidneys. So, retention of water from the kidneys. Anybody from the class? Okay, you are correct. So, antidiuretic hormone released from the posterior lobe promotes retention of water in the kidneys. As the name implies, it stops diuresis or your urination. So it stops urination, thus promoting your retention of water in the kidneys. Any questions? None? So then let's proceed. Okay, everyone, take a good look at the image of the brain and where your pituitary gland is located. So that is where your pituitary gland is located. Once again, thank you for joining me on our Bio 200 Laboratory Series, Chapter 9, Integrate, and you're still with Chris.